Okay, good afternoon everyone who's joined the webinar so far. There may well be a couple of other people who join as we get into it, but it's just drifted past 1 o'clock. What's actually turning out to be quite a sunny Thursday here in London. So I'm joined by Matt Davis, who's our Client Solutions Manager. I am James Kippenberger, look after our product strategy for Big Hand. I guess thanks to everyone for giving up a little bit of time today to hear what we're going to be talking about. I guess really this webinar came about from several different angles, one of which was the recent article that appeared in the Raconteur supplement of the Times, and it generated quite a lot of interest. We thought we'd pull out, I guess, some of the salient points from that. Looking down the list of firms who've joined the webinar, I think there's a broad mix. Some people are, I guess, at the beginning of journey of understanding. Other people are kind of looking at projects they're planning to implement in the next kind of 2 to 3 months. And then others actually are kind of well into the project and making some changes within the firm. So I'm going to run through a handful of slides and then we'll have time for Matt to just do a brief demonstration of some of the tech, but then we'll endeavour to come back and talk about some case studies as well, just highlighting how other firms have actually made some changes to assist with the issue. And I guess really that's a good place to start. So really what we're talking about here is working with firms to help uncover what currently is an operational blind spot. There's an area of the business which is a very key part of the business, which is proving less easy to manage, and part of that is a lack of visibility and understanding about what's happening in that space. And I guess really in terms of really setting the scene, a lot of the stuff on the slide here you guys will be very familiar with. There is a phrase that is getting used increasingly, and that's really around trying to make sure that you guys, law firms, our customers, are having to deliver more and more for less. And that's as a result of a whole bunch of pressures, internal, but then a whole host of external pressures in the marketplace that are driving behaviours or driving the need to make certain changes. And really that's kind of creating a squeeze in several areas, and particularly, I guess, profitability and operational efficiency are probably two of the really key hot topics of the moment. And what that means is, within organisations, we're finding that IT teams, project teams, support services teams are constantly being asked to find ways to deliver more and more value, and perhaps with less resource time than they'd had previously. And I guess really what's come out of that is some research that we've done with our customers quite some time ago, and obviously continues to go on with the conversations that we have with our customers. And what we've kind of uncovered, I guess, or what we've seen is there is a series of processes within a law firm where work needs to be delegated or work needs to be done by the back office or by support staff, and at the moment that's slightly unmanaged and almost certainly undercover. And I guess this is really the part of the business where we're trying to find a way of lifting the lid, I guess, and finding out what's going on in this area. And really what that means is where work needs to be delegated, where work needs to be done by support staff, and where non-legal work needs to be actioned in a sensible way, there's a whole bunch of different ways those things are being delegated. So we have phone calls being made, we have a lot of emails being sent, we have verbal instructions, we have post-it notes occasionally, and we have people dictating tasks. And that's kind of all great on one level, but what that means is quite often the instruction is incomplete, quite often there needs to be some clarification around what's required, sometimes duplication of work. In a worst case scenario, you may find there's work that's being lost or just not finished for a particular client. But in essence, all of that is difficult if you can't really see what's going on in this area. Only when you can see what's going on can sensible decisions then be made about making sure that the right work is indeed going to the right place, so that work is being picked up and done at the right cost, and that there's a prioritization system that says, and this is when we need to be doing that stuff. And I guess in a very simplistic way, what we found is that quite often you have arguably lower value tasks which are being done not necessarily by the most cost-effective resource. And whilst that's historically maybe been okay, I think what we're finding is that law firms are being challenged increasingly by their customers to, back to the more for less phrase, to do stuff by the right resource. And by that, I guess I mean customers are less willing to pay for low value tasks. So that starts with making sure that lawyers perhaps themselves delegate more work and become less self-sufficient in certain areas. That may be that PAs themselves actually start to delegate work to others within the organisation, team assistants and what have you. And in doing so, by putting this process in place and by understanding it, we can then cut out a lot of the duplication, we can enhance the instructions given with the pieces of work, and we can make sure that the right work is indeed being done by the right place. And I think, I guess, really the broad theme of this is saying, in order to do that, in order to move this forward, one of the key starting points is to create transparency. And I guess the questions on the screen are pretty self-explanatory. But this is saying, what is this work that we're talking about? What are the types of work being done? How much work is coming through? Where's it coming from, and who's completing it? As a result of that, we can then start to establish which teams are busy, which teams maybe have capacity and maybe definitely don't have capacity. And then there's a whole piece about efficiency. So certainly where we've done this work elsewhere, we've discovered you may have a team who's maybe generating a lot of revenue, but actually is generating a smaller amount of profit, and that's partly because they haven't got this bit of the aspect as tight as it might be. This is also, in fairness, a little bit about saying if we have this information today, then we know a little bit about the demand. And if we know what the demand is today, we can then extrapolate that and say, what do we think the future might look like? And this is all about saying, what are the most sensible resourcing decisions that we should be making as a business in terms of structure, in terms of allocation. And if we do that, if we get visibility, then we can start to streamline business services where it makes sense to do that. Certainly from the initial bunch of implementations, I guess, we've done over the last 12, 18 months in this area, we've learned an awful lot alongside our customers. And although really this is being driven as an IT project, and it absolutely should be, quite often what you find with these things, that whilst it absolutely looks like an IT project on the outside, there's just a whole host of non-technical, non-IT change aspects that really move the dial from it being an implementation to a successful shift in how the firm operates. And what we tried to do was pull out some of the salient points from that to try and make sure that other firms can learn from those lessons, don't make the same mistakes, and get stuff aligned up front. So what we did is we kind of pulled out, if you like, the key steps to that. I'm not going to spend too long on this. There is a document that comes with it, which we'll be happy to circulate. But this is about really, I guess, understanding why any of this needs to happen. And obviously this is about challenging the status quo, understanding why we think changes need to be made. And then it's about visualizing that future state and saying, okay, if we think there is a better way of operating, what does that actually look like? How can we articulate that? How can we present that to the business? And how can we strive to achieve it? The third one on here, speed, cost, competence, I guess comes back to what I was just talking about, and that is saying where historically some of the structures and arrangements might be around departments, might be around offices, might be around locations, increasingly firms are saying, well, actually, is there a slightly different lens on this that says, what is the fastest way to get this work done? What is the least expensive way of getting this work done? And importantly, are the particular competencies in the back office with our support teams that we should be enhancing, working on, specializing? There was a great phrase that came out of a small rollout we did in actually Western Australia, and they talked about this concept of pods of excellence. Small organization, probably maximum 50, 60 people, but they wanted to exploit the fact they had some great people doing great stuff, and they wanted to get them really focused on doing that in the support structure rather than a generic list of work. I think the next one on here, ROI, I've said myth, legend or reality, mostly because I think people have different views on these sorts of calculations, but in the end this is about saying very few projects get off the ground without a sensible return on investment, and actually really understanding the baseline the status quo, what we do today is the critical first step. So really understanding what we do today, what that looks like, will then give you a very sensible basis to measure whether we've actually delivered on what we set out to do. I think the fifth one on here, they're all important, but this one is key. Who's driving this? Where is this coming from? Who's saying this is a sensible thing? Who's going to champion the exercise all the way through from start to finish if we're viewing it as a change program? And that links very much in with the sixth one on here, which is in order to kind of facilitate any of these sorts of changes, then we need to have a joint push and pull. So obviously this needs to come from the sponsor, the champion, and the executive. But we need to find ways of making sure the staff, the individuals, those affected, pull this into the organisation and they too understand why this is a sensible way of working. And part of that is number 7. Part of that is saying, well, actually, rather than support teams within a business simply being the recipients of work, let's give them an opportunity to actually provide a service back to their internal customers, the lawyers, and say, this is what we do, we're proud of it, we do it very well, we're experts in it, we will save you time, we'll help the business, and that's our role in the organisation. Communication, obviously, without stating the obvious, is a very, very key part of any project, and this is around making sure that it's not a kind of quick blast up front. This is about making sure there's continuous communication throughout the project, and really, I guess the adage here is to remember that bad news tends to travel significantly faster than good news, and it tends to be louder as well. So this is about making sure that informal and formal communications around this sort of project are key. I guess the next couple are really around saying, what should we do first? If we think there's some sensible changes to make, do we put the software in first and then make the change? Or do we make the change and then bring some software in to support that? And I guess really our view has been that actually part of getting the technology in means that you then get this data, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, that then means you can then make these informed decisions about how best to implement it. And point 10 on here is about saying don't also assume that you will get it perfectly right on day one. It needs to be an iterative process, and we've seen this with some of the early implementations we've done, and it's that review and refine, being honest about what's not been brilliant, and then going back out with some changes to maximize the effect. The last two is really all around adoption. So who goes first? Where should we start? Where's this going to go well? Who's going to say it's a good thing? Let's generate some early momentum. And then adoption is the single most important thing with this. If people don't use tech, if people don't change the way that they work, everything that has preceded it becomes irrelevant, and really that is the thing that drives this forward. So as I've kind of alluded to, there is a document that supports some of these strands. If people would like to read that, have access to that, we're very happy to send that out or come in and see you individually and present it. The 13th one on there, so apologies to anyone who's superstitious, 13 is probably a bad number to have chosen, but 13 is about celebrating success. And I think sometimes we are all guilty of moving on to the next project, and that is an important part, but obviously we do need, with any organisation, to make sure that when we've done something, it's gone well, to reward those involved and make sure that that was celebrated accordingly. So I mentioned data there, and just, I guess, pulling out one of the little diagrams that was on the article itself that I referenced at the beginning. This is actually an example of, I guess, illustrating the problem we're trying to solve. So just very briefly, the grey that's on there, if you can see it, that's the amount of work that's going through the system where there is no agreed, sensible person to do that piece of work. The black on there is where work is being sent through to support teams within the organisation, but that is going to the wrong resource. And what we mean by that is, let's say, for example, it's a very, very low value menial task that's maybe going to an inappropriately expensive person to do that job that just doesn't make sense. And then green is really where we've then said, okay, we now know where we want that work to go, and it is now going to the correct resource. So what that graph is really telling us, I guess stating the obvious a little bit, but what it's actually telling us is, at the beginning of this process, organisation is operationally blind. There is no data in order to make a decision about what should or shouldn't be happening. Then as the technology comes in, the data starts to become available. We see that actually work is going through, but there is a very high percentage of that work that is not necessarily going to the correct place, to the correct team, at the correct time, at the correct location. Once organisation knows that, understands that, we can then inform sensible decisions, change program, communication, working practice change, workflow change, whatever it is, and we can then start to steer the work to the correct resource and simultaneously just push adoption and push adoption. Moving slightly further on, just to kind of take that a step further. So this is an example data, and this is, if you like, not a kind of a standard report, but what we did is we did a bit of a deep dive with a few organisations, and this is kind of an example of some of that sort of data. And this is saying, okay, well, actually part of the plan was to try and get more work to the document production unit. We want to do that, and we want to see turnaround time come down. So that graph is validating, A, whether that's what's happened, and B, allowing you to make some changes if that's not what's happened. So work to the DPU going up, great. Turnaround time down, which is great. On the right-hand side, very clear list of the sorts of things that they're doing. And that, again, just enables you to start to make decisions about future ways of working. So this one here is about saying, actually, we are okay for our PAs to continue to do stuff. That's great. That's what we want them to do. And actually, the turnaround time has gone up in this instance. This is around the fact what we're doing is we're actually now moving them to slightly higher value tasks, slightly more client-facing, engaging tasks, which are likely to take longer than the previous work that they were doing. But what it does, and on the right-hand side, the little red circle there says, actually, we might, as an organisation, feel that there's still work that the PAs are doing that maybe could be done by others in the organisation. There may be a chunk of work that we could still move across and get done by somebody else. And again, third one here, before we kind of flip into a quick demonstration, same principle, TAs, so maybe teams of assistants doing very particular work types, will obviously now be getting more work as a result of the change, and that is all coming back to the central premise that once you know what's going on, you can make sensible decisions about where work should be done and who should be doing it. And I think it's safe to say, although the numbers on here are large, and obviously some of the stories that have been talked about have been about the large organisations, there are a mix on this call today. We've had some great projects of all shapes and sizes of organisations. This is not something that's just for the big guys. This is for firms who genuinely believe there's value to be had and who understand about making some changes in the operational way of working. So I guess in summary, so this is really about the kind of business problem we think people are trying to solve. But just in terms of summary, the Big Hand Now technology, which was mentioned in the article that obviously we are implementing today, is really a task delegation solution that's all around optimizing the effectiveness of the support staff. The thing we've really tried to focus on is making sure that it goes in quickly and people adopt it. And people here at Big Hand Now bang on about it slightly ad nauseum, but adoption in the end is going to be the thing that underpins whether people do or don't get the ROI that they want to get. So I'll be quiet. That was 20 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes longer than I had originally planned to speak for. But I will flip over to Matt, who's going to give us a very quick overview of the tech, and then hopefully we'll come back and have a chance just to talk about some of the other projects that we've run.
Okay, thanks, James. So to get to that point that James has just mentioned about having data in the background underpinning changes that you potentially want to make to your organisations, it's firstly important to be able to measure the volume of specific tasks that are going through the system, and that's something that Big Hand Now does very well. There are 3 user cases that I'm going to touch on very, very quickly. A lawyer submitting a task into the Big Hand system and the ease at which they can do that, taking away thought process from them about where that piece of work is potentially going. Also, to that degree, potentially not the lawyer inputting that task, but a PA on the lawyer's behalf, again, ensuring that that task is done by either a specialist person or an individual with the right skill set to be able to turn that task around in the shortest amount of time. Or alternatively, a member of a central or a specialist team, such as a reprographics unit or potentially even a document production unit, creating tasks on behalf of requests that they potentially get through today in email or other systems. And that's where we see a number of challenges in the legal industry, specifically around email, because A, there is no way to measure the volumes of work that are coming through, but more importantly, there's no visibility to those users, making it very difficult for them to potentially prioritize the work that they have to do, and in future provide a better service to ultimately the lawyers that they're undertaking those tasks for. So we'll cover off user scenario 1 initially, and that is, I am a lawyer and I want to create a new task and submit that into the system. So we've developed the desktop assistant. It's been designed in such a way that it's always available. It just sits on the lawyer's desktop, and when they want to create a task, they can either drag and drop from email or drag and drop a document onto the desktop assistant, which will create a brand new task for them. At which point they're presented with a simple interface, the attachment has been added, and then they're presented with a drop down of work types. Now, one of the beauties of the Big Hand Now technology is that we can pair with these work types the correct location or workflow that piece of work needs to go down. So when I choose scanning, you'll notice that the workflow automatically updates to go to the reprographics team. If I choose a document center request, that updates to go through to the document production workflow. And as soon as I've chosen the correct request and specified the deadline that I need that request completed by, I click on next, and I'm presented with a completely customizable form where we can capture all of the relevant information up front and submit that information through to the relevant person. Now, the challenge the organizations have with doing this today in email is that it's completely at the mercy of the lawyer how much information they do or do not give. And you cannot specify that certain information is mandatory. So with Big Hand Now, we've implemented a function that allows us to state that there are mandatory fields. So I cannot go any further until I've filled out at least the minimum amount of required information. Now, based on feedback from the initial implementations based around law firms in the UK that we did in this area, a number of them kind of told us that a lot of legal work is repetitive. So lawyers are dealing with the same clients and they're dealing with the same matters. And also that lawyers are very particular about the way in which they want their documents formatting, whether they want things printed double-sided, etc. So the information input into the form is often going to be exactly the same. So if I choose this encore form here and then click on next, the form is actually already filled in for me. So reducing the amount of keystrokes that a user has to make, I can just go and amend any information in the form that I wish to. And as soon as I'm happy with that, I click on send. And as already mentioned, that goes through to the relevant, most cost-efficient resource that is available at the law firm to do that task in the least amount of time. That's kind of a, I guess, utopian vision, having every single lawyer across the organization utilizing the Big Hand Now desktop assistant on a day-by-day basis. Another use case or another scenario that we were very, very aware of is a lawyer walking across an office and verbally giving instructions to their PA, or potentially even emailing their PA, or as James mentioned at the beginning, they may be dictating this information. So we thought about that from a task capture perspective as well. I'm actually logged in here to the Big Hand Hub as a PA account, and I, as this user, have the ability to raise tasks on behalf of the lawyer. So again, the lawyers come out of their office or they phoned me up and said, I need this piece of work doing. I need this document scanning 100 times. I can create a task in the Big Hand Hub, but I have the ability as the PA to specify the lawyer that it is who's requested to have that piece of work completed. I go through the same process. So let's say this time it was a scanning request. I attach anything that I need to attach and click on next. And I'm presented with a completely different form, again, that sits in line with the information that needs to be captured up front to do this task right first time. Something else that we kind of understood quite quickly is there's a very inefficient clarification process that goes on between lawyers and PAs, or PAs and centralized teams, in that if all the right information isn't captured first time, that person has to clarify exactly what the lawyer wants. In the scenario of Big Hand Now, and something that we have seen as a significant impact at other law firms already, is a significant reduction in that clarification time, ultimately creating more time for the support team to be actually doing the tasks that are submitted through to them, and more fee-earning time for the lawyer. Again, I fill in that form as the PA and send that one through. Now, what we're actually doing, much like we did historically with dictation, is shining a big light on the variety of different tasks that are actually going through the system. So in the background, within our database, we capture all of that. I just want to walk you through very, very quickly the level of information that we do capture. So in this data set, which is incredibly rich, we capture the following information. So users that have actually been undertaking tasks, which departments they sit in, what activities they've been undertaking, when tasks were sent, when they were completed, when they were started, even down to the granular level of if it related to a specific client and matter. And what you can actually start doing with this data is incredibly powerful. So if I flick over to a pivot table that I've built based off the back of that data, I now get a breakdown of all the different work types that are actually going through the system. So as a law firm, you can make sensible decisions that are based on fact on recruitment. So if you were to find that the vast majority of requests going through the system are photocopying or scanning, that informs your decision making about the level of person that you need to recruit to undertake those particular types of tasks. You also get a breakdown of the amount of effort your support teams have expunged on these particular task types, which should inform potential training requirements. If I flick over to utilization, and this is the one that the vast majority of organizations are talking about, that what the information that they actually want is around, are our support teams busy, and if so, what are they doing, and what are they spending their time on from a task perspective. So in this pivot table, I have a breakdown of all the different PAs or secretaries or operators within my organization, and a breakdown of the activities that they've been doing either on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or over the course of a month, if you wanted to break it down to that level of detail. And this will give you an understanding if the right people are actually doing the right tasks. So as organizations look at restructuring and moving work to specialism teams, you want to ensure that that change is actually being adhered to ensure that the best service is being provided to the lawyers. And something else that highlights the level of information that we can uncover within Big Hand is a fairly new piece of technology that we've developed called Team Tracker, which in layman's terms is a secretarial timesheet, but all of the information input into this timesheet is mined from our database. So again, very quickly, we're building up a view of what an individual is doing throughout the course of a day and can make decisions based on whether or not they should be doing those tasks, or if those tasks are better off done by other individuals in different potentially geographic locations across the organization. That was a very, very quick run through of the Big Hand technology. I'm actually now just going to pass back over to James just to finish things off.